didn't think I was going to be taking a look at any Razer keyboards for the foreseeable future. I had just wrapped up on the Razer Huntsman TKL, and I had pretty much done the entire Razer Huntsman line. I had the TKL, the full-sized, and the 60%. And as I was looking for more snaky products, as you do, this came out. This is the Razer Huntsman Analog Mini. And let's just say, if this is what I hope it is, this is the perfect Razer Huntsman Analog. So let's get into it right after the intro. So why am I saying that this is the perfect Razer Huntsman Analog? Well, there's one reason. There's a fatal flaw with the Razer Huntsman Analog, and it is unfortunately one that isn't resolved anywhere in software or anything with the hardware. And the problem is actually game developers. So the Razer Huntsman Analog uses a split signal between an analog controller input and a keyboard input. It actually responds in your system as two different devices. Because of that, unfortunately, some games don't necessarily play very well with it. And any game that's programmed to use controller 1 as the default input will pretty much not allow you to plug in a new controller to play set games. This is only a problem if the analog isn't capable of actually bridging the gap between an actual controller and a keyboard, which unfortunately there are quite a few. And if a game doesn't allow controller and mouse inputs, the analog becomes an incredibly difficult device to use. Keeping it on your desk with that in mind, you end up in a situation where you either have to unplug or disable the controller function on your Razer Huntsman Analog, which cannot be done from the Razer software, but rather the control panel in Windows. So you end up having to disable this entire keyboard's function just so that you can use a controller in games that are just poorly optimized. That is where this comes in. This is where this keyboard hopefully fixes things, because this keyboard has one feature that the normal analog does not, and that is a detachable cable. That's right. This has the exact same guts as the Mini. 60% layout, meaning you can have it nice and reduced in size, making it a perfect auxiliary keyboard as opposed to your main one. So you can have your main office keyboard with all of your keys, and you can have this one off to the side to switch in when you start gaming. I know it sounds crazy, but honestly, that is the perfect solution to this keyboard, because you're also going to be mapping this keyboard like crazy. And that means that sometimes it's not going to even function as a proper keyboard. This is where I thought maybe the Razer Tartarus would actually kind of be a better solution, but ergonomic keyboards have their own issues. So you have to map everything as opposed to something's already being mapped for you. So this being only 60%, cheaper than the original and cheaper than the Tartarus, means that this should be the perfect middle ground, because you now have full keyboard and you have full analog. And if you have a game that you want to play that doesn't allow for the analog inputs, you can just unplug it and it will disappear out of controller 1 slot. So ideally, this will fix all of the problems that I had with the analog. But I also hope that it keeps all of the benefit, because you guys know I modded mine into what I consider one of the best pre-built keyboards I've ever used. And I just got more 205 grade 0 to make sure that this one is the same. Let's get into it. So on the box, it's pretty much the same as any Razer Huntsman's boxing and branding. This one just kind of tells you about the analog, Razer Synapse required, yeah, all that stuff. All right, unboxing wise, pretty normal unboxing for them lately. Like this kind of minimal packaging that they've been doing. Warranty, stickers, instructions, cable, board. That's it. Cable, nice braided cable, slotted end, USB-C, all good to see, which means we're gonna be able to use it with all of our custom cables. Well, actually, that's something I do want to test, because supposedly the Razer Huntsman Analog had to have 2 plugs because of how much power was needed for this. So we'll see if using the custom coiled cables will affect things. All right. It looks... Whoa, that's weird. Why does it sound so poppy? Let me swap these keycaps really quickly because I can feel the cheapness of the keycap like kind of like reverberating here. So let me actually switch over to the ones that are actually on my Huntsman as is right now, but we really just need this section right here just from this keyboard. So what's funny too is these are also Razer keycaps, but they feel so much better than these. I didn't even put them on. So I can confirm that these are actually all 100% standard spacing, which is awesome, including spacebar. Now that I've got some decent PBT keycaps on here, what do I think? Well, let's take a listen. All right, so there's a bit that I like and a bit that I don't. I think that this has the same assembly as the Huntsman, which means gonna be super easy to take apart. We're gonna have to test it in its default configuration, and I'll get back to you guys as soon as I'm done with that. But the ones that have the stabilizers, the ones that I've lubed the stabs, I lubed the stabs prior because they're the same ones from the Huntsman. These already sound better. So it sounds like there is some improvement that is to be had from using 205 grade 0, which I will do. Also, my combination of Razer Dulce, yeah, this just needs to be a thing, Razer. Can you guys actually make this? Well, we're done testing it. And good news is I was right. This is the best analog keyboard that Razer has put out so far. Now, it is a little light. It is a little cheap feeling, and it honestly can use the same love that we gave to the full-size one, which we're gonna do. Heads up, we're gonna do it. But yeah, this keyboard fixes a lot of the problems that the full size had. For one, it can be easily removed off the desk if it interferes with the game. Two, more games are now supporting analog that didn't support it before. Phantasy Star Online 2, a game that I really was playing a lot at the time when I did the original review, and more importantly, a game that used to actually break with this with the analog input actually in the system, now works, and it works perfectly. I actually have my own custom profile just for this. That being said, you will be switching profiles a lot. So if you're not comfortable getting into Razer Synapse and making a bunch of profiles that auto launch with specific games, well, then this isn't really gonna be for you. That being said, the recommended configuration for this, like if I had to make a suggestion, would be to have this as a secondary keyboard and a primary keyboard on your desk that remains unmapped as a typical keyboard. Now, with the 60%, that is actually a very doable thing. And then having this mapped to whatever game you need, well, it works perfectly. And in some games, there are very few, like Phantasy Star Online, Kingdom Hearts, where there are menu systems and kind of like analog needed like dodges and stuff like that. That is where this truly shines. And games like Cyberpunk or even Grand Theft Auto would be a great example of a game where you have driving mechanics and standard shooting and mechanics. This works better than a controller because you can get that mouse and keyboard accuracy, and you can still get that kind of control that you would be expecting from a game with driving. So you can actually have a mapped driving mode, which I have set up in a sort of loop where I hit the function key and the Z key, and it switches into a mode that has W as accelerate and
S as brake, and then these as just the analog triggers. So, or as the analog stick. So it ends up working out pretty well in situations like that. It gives you more control. Cyberpunk, where everything is first person only, it's incredible. And a game like Phantasy Star Online or Kingdom Hearts, where you can use your mouse and have the scroll function. And in Phantasy Star, you can actually use your number keys as hotkeys, is great. Like, it's all great there, with some caveats that you have to set up layers, essentially, that your keyboard can switch to for when you need to type to somebody, because when this is mapped to analog, W no longer works. It's no longer W. So if I were going to say, hey, my username, I can't press the W key when it's in analog mode. Or when you're driving and then you switch to not driving, you pull out your weapon and you just start blasting away at a crowd because you forgot that W is currently set to a trigger. Yeah, that happened too. The point is, with some practice, with some work, this is an amazing keyboard. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mod it. You've heard the default sound test. So now let's actually get a nice, heavy, modded sound test in after I do all that work.
To get into this board is actually pretty simple. There's just a bunch of screws right here on the top of the plate, and after you unscrew them, there's absolutely nothing holding the board down. There's a ribbon cable and a power cable that you do have to disconnect. Be very careful with this ribbon cable, as it disconnects from the daughter board and not from the main board itself. Now, taking out our switches is exactly the same as any other Razer Huntsman. There are two tabs that hold the switch in place that can actually be pressed in to remove the switch. Put a little bit of pressure and they should come right out. Try to avoid using too much force. Now, to disassemble the switch, all we're going to really need to do is remove the wire from the actual main switch. This way we can lube the wire completely separately and lube the switches as needed. Now, fortunately for me, I actually have a bunch of these already prepared, but I'll go ahead and show you what it looks like to prepare one. What I've found from lubing these switches is the best way to actually lube them is to lube this top housing completely. That is all of the flat sides and the side underneath the wings. Then you want to try to actually lube up the slides by shoving your brush into the slide section of the switch. Give it a couple presses and it should be good to go. Now, with the wire, just cover it completely in lube and reinstall, and there you go. Now you've got a lubed Huntsman switch. While disassembling this board, I did notice that there's actually a layer of foam on the bottom of the case. That means that this board is already foam modded, I guess. I guess it's really just foam stock. Either way, there's already foam, so we don't have to do a foam mod, and due to the very limited nature of the case itself, I am not able to do any weight mods like I originally intended to. I actually intended to make an entire false bottom for this case that actually allows us to use a copper weight that I picked up on Amazon for this project. Unfortunately, I did not go with that route because it would just make the board too tall and it would just be uncomfortable to use. And with that though, our board is done. Reassembly is pretty straightforward. We push all of our switches in, no solder needed. And reassembly of the board is the exact same in reverse. We plug in our ribbon cables and our power cable, and then we just screw the entire thing back together. It comes together really easily, and so honestly, this one gets a 10 out of 10 for disassembly reassembly process. And with the keycaps on it, we're ready to test.
All right, what did you guys think of that? Because honestly, I think this is S tier. A modded Razer Huntsman Analog has been on my favorites list for a while. But now, with the detachable cable, with its smaller form factor, the ease of plugging it in and removing it, this actually makes sense. This keyboard makes sense now. And there were some upgrades that Razer decided to omit from the pages talking about this, including a foam backing that they've got, which the last time I had a Mini, I added myself. Not to mention, this time, everything came apart with just screws. This means that this board's incredibly easy to take apart and put back together again. Also, the switches come out the exact same way that they used to, but I did find that you can actually remove a switch without removing the plate first. Granted, I don't advise doing that because I actually damaged a couple switches in the process of taking the board apart in the first place. Luckily, I had extra switches because, you know, I was harvesting switches from my Razer Huntsman and not using the ones from the Mini. Overall, this board is pretty amazing, and I really wouldn't change all that much about it after lubing it. It sounds great, it sounds custom, it's a little light, but it's also 60%. And when you compare it to the rest of my 60%ers, this is the only one that I actually intend to use on a regular basis. But that's where we're gonna end it today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, you can leave it a like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Wolfie, out.